Hello everybody. I'm going to talk to you about reminiscence theatre today, no surprises there, but I hope I'll open up some thoughts for you that you might not have thought of in relation to this. Can you see clearly? Is the image okay? Perhaps turn off one row of lights. Well, that's fine. I think, is that better for you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to look at the process of making theatre from memories. All the pictures are of actual shows that we did over the years. This was one of the most challenging, actually. It was a show with black and white pensioners working together to make a play. It was out of the comfort zone of absolutely anything. But they decided that they would do it, and they were going to make a play in a week. And they did, and I brought over a director from America, a black director, and we modelled the working together. There's a very big reward for anybody who can find the video of this film. But it's disappeared, unfortunately, not into the archive, God knows where it is. But it was really groundbreaking to have the black and white older people who didn't share their memories of pain and strife. We instead concentrated on how they found out about the facts of life, and it was called The Birds and the Bees. It was funny, it was rewarding, and I wish I had a copy of it. So there we are, hundreds of pounds if you found one. Something should happen. Here it is. So I'm going to be talking about professional theatre. There's even quite a bit of glamour about it. This photograph was the very first show we did, the 50 years ago show, the only show we arrived at by improvisation. We collected the stories, we improvised around them, and felt that we could make a show in that way. It was only later, a very little bit later, that I had the great pleasure of seeing a programme which David Thacker made at the Duke's house, the Duke's Playhouse in Lancaster, in which all the words came from the interviews. And so David really kind of changed the course of direction of the company, because I was so taken with what you did that I based all the later shows on the use of verbatim material from the interviews. So it's a very significant day that David's here to present for you after me, and I'm very happy about that. So the professional theatre, we ran a professional company for about 22, 23 years, all on equity contracts, all doing shows based on older people's memories and all using the verbatim. And because we came to admire and like the idea of using and giving a further life to the original stories, a book was made to go with every single show. We were strongly advised against this. People said it was a slow form of suicide, because it meant staying up all night to make the books while trying to direct the show. I wouldn't recommend it. And Joyce Holliday, or Joyce Cheeseman, who was mentioned a lot yesterday, was staying in the house with us, coming down at 4 in the morning saying, "Go to bed!" But we didn't. We got the books out. So professional reminiscence theatre, it's based on recorded interviews with groups and individuals. Some people would regard group interviews in the oral history sphere as being not a good thing to do. But our target was to make a play. Our target wasn't to make an archive, really. Quite a lot of the work we did with the books and later the archive was a kind of byproduct from the actual theatre, which was what it was we all there to do and wanted to make a success of. It's with professional writers, actors, designers, musical directors, very important, and stage managers, all working together as a team towards an end product. It's professionally scripted, incorporating all those recorded interviews, had a conventional rehearsal period, but as I mentioned yesterday, but a lot of course weren't there yesterday, the actors recruited the older people to attend the rehearsals and to ensure the authenticity of what we were doing, so that if they were playing a docker, they looked like a docker and they looked like somebody who knew how to lift a 100-weight sack onto their shoulder. So it was also a terribly intensive rehearsal period because we were always very ambitious about the music. The music was absolutely critical to the shows. It was music chosen by the older people we consulted so that we could be sure that it would be meaningful and that people would not only recognise but remember the music and sing along. So all my memories of going to the theatre shows and seeing them in care homes, day centres, clubs and so on was of these sort of gravelly voices, a bit like mine today, I'm afraid, singing along these songs that were of their period and which forged so many connections and associations in their mind and complemented the show. But it did mean the actors had to spend a lot of time not just learning their lines, not just meeting their sources, but also learning quite complicated musical arrangements. I'm going to just show you a sample show so that you get the feeling of how it was done. I don't know why I'm putting all this in the past tense, because it may be there is still some of this going on, but we can talk about that later on. So what were the aims of this project? It was going to be called Memory Lane. Not very original, you might say, but original names put people off. So this seemed comfortable and okay. You must remember the word memories was really frightening for people until about the mid-80s or early 90s, because memories were considered really rather dangerous things. And you didn't want to stir old people up, and you didn't want to make them cry. Just wanted them to be quiet. But of course things changed a lot, and the value of reminiscence was gradually discovered as a means of placing people in time, reminding people of their role over the last 70 or 80 years. We wanted to record local memories, so this was the only show that was done up the road in Blackheath, based on Blackheath people's memories, and specialising in one little street in the village where, by a remarkable piece of luck, several people had lived and had not seen each other for about 60 years. And somehow or other, by a series of magic encounters, they all came together and replayed, retold, revisited their youth and the quality of that street and the neighbourliness, etc. It was a wonderful thing. I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. So we wanted to create a theatre production which would not only play to the local area but much more widely. And we wanted to tour it nationally, which we did. And it actually created a lot of opportunities for work between generations and between cultures as it toured around. So we began by asking people if they had photographs like this of the local area, could they bring them in, could they talk about them. We had a computer which could photograph their photographs and spotlight particular areas of the photograph. And they could record into the computer their memories to do with the photograph. And this was, if you like, the raw material of the show. Now, this is the neighbours of the street I was telling you about, Collins Street. And these people had grown up together. So these two ladies here, one was holding a microphone, as you can see, they kept in touch with each other all their lives. But the others were coming together after a very, very long gap. And obviously enjoying enormously recording their own memories, prompted by a display and photographs, rather nice picture of the camels on their way to the circus on Blackheath, and lots of symbolic objects and paintings there to get their memories going. It is a group process, and I like a group process. I think, although I like individual interviews and I like working with longer interviews with people who have plenty to say, there's something really quite magical about the way a group takes off, where one person remembers something, it gets added to, it gets multiplied. And so often people start out saying, I really don't have anything to say, is it okay if I just listen? But then the memories do come, and they come, because they're spontaneous, they come in a form that makes them ideal for converting into monologue or dialogue for the plays that we make. Again, star storytellers turn up. These two women were extraordinary, and they became the main characters in the play, and they gave us their stories. If we were stuck, we'd phone them up. We knew them, and they'd help us out with the content. Scripting the memories. Everything's transcribed. We were very lucky. We were given computers by the GLC. And from then on, we transcribed absolutely everything. And then the writers go through the material, select the key stories, and try to find a container for those stories, a structure to hold the stories together. And they create a draft script from those memories. That's me working with Clare Summerskill. We worked together for many years. And she took off in another direction, which you'll hear about later today. But you can see there the great volume of transcripts we plod through with a view to finding the story for these characters. The professional production process, yes, the director welcomes the actors and they talk about the project and the set and so on. Sometimes the actors themselves, very often they're involved in the interviewing process. The designer needs to make a touring set. This is not a company that plays 7 shows a week in theatres. It's 7 shows a week in 7 different venues. So loading stuff in and out of vans, finding a portable set, finding a set which is prompting memories and is meaningful, perhaps because the most important thing in a way was that we would go to an audience who already had memories of what we were going to talk about, but who hadn't revisited those memories for a very long time. So even the visual aspects, the design and the props and so on, had to have a function. We had a conventional rehearsal period, not generous, because we were never really quite adequately funded, but we did manage to be funded enough to pay the actors the equity rating for 23 years, without a penny from the Arts Council. Except yesterday I did remember that we did receive £1,000 to pay for Joyce Holiday to write a script for it. But otherwise, the money came from all sorts of sources, from health, from industry, from trade unions a lot, especially when we were doing shows like On the River to mark the centenary of the docker strike and so on. And then the business that I talked about yesterday of older people attending rehearsals, which was very important. This is Olive, who was a neighbour of mine who died very recently. She was a major storyteller. She's in her 90s there. She absolutely doesn't look it. And as a young woman, she was a hairdresser, very fashionable, and she's loaded all her stuff onto the computer I was telling you about. And this is Jules, the actor, who is playing her. And I love that slide because I think they look just like each other. and I think it really was like that. You know, I mean, they forged very close bonds with the people they were playing. So there we are, 7 shows a week, 12 weeks, in and out of the van, reaching 4,000 people. Older people in the audiences, but sometimes mixed ages, and quite a lot to do with local schools. Now notice the instruments. I mean, I've always recruited actors with instrumental skills. And there's the set. And the set was based very, very exactly on that road. But when other people came to the show from all over the country, they would say, that's my house. And because they identified very strongly. The shows were funny. I'd love to show you a little bit, but I'll see if I've got time at the end. Mostly there was a matching publication and exhibition. Here you can see a bit more of the Blackheath exhibition with the fairground, boating pond. We various bombers overhead, and a lot of things to remind people of the place when they were young. I'm going to switch focus now for a little while to talk about older people making theatre from their memories. I saw a lot of this work in America and in Germany. All the older people I had contact with were the ones who helped out in the Reminiscence Centre, which was a centre for training in reminiscence and for visitors to come from care homes and all sorts of places. It had a big museum of everyday life. The older people were the people who worked in the cafe. But I came back from Germany and America full of ideas that they could actually act if they would like to. And they all said they really, really would not like to. This was a very, very bad idea. Perfectly happy making the sandwiches, and please, please don't make us. But I went in for a bit of emotional blackmail because my friends in Germany, and if you're here tomorrow, you'll see them online. I couldn't confess to them that I had found nobody. They were going to come over for 2 weeks and make a show, and I couldn't tell them that nobody wanted to do it. So I begged them to just drop the sandwiches for a couple of days and come just even for one day and see if they liked it. And they really loved it. They were very good, these two German directors. They were brilliant. Gave them a wonderful time, lunch and things like that. And they stayed for 12 years, and we did 12 shows, and they were in their 70s when they began, you know. So it was extraordinary, actually. And when we took them to old people's audiences, not only did they identify like crazy, but they were all saying, "Oh, they're wonderful, they're wonderful." So their egos were enormous, enormous. I think I told you yesterday, they started calling each other darling, and it's quite worrying, really. But you know, what's so interesting is the way the memories flowed, that this was, they all remembered seeing a giant ship go up the Thames, and those ships were so huge in relation to the tiny little back-to-back houses that people lived in. And the lady at the front said there was this huge ship came up the river, and the man in the group who remembered all the facts and figures just said, "The Mauretania." Oh yes, it was the Mauretania, just before the outbreak of war, Second World War. And so the older people were playing out their memories. That was their memories of being kids sitting outside the pub, because they weren't allowed in the pub, while the parents sang hideously and drunkenly inside, and every now and then came out and said, "Would you like a little oatmeal biscuit, cup of lemonade?" What? You went back into the excitement of the pub, and they were reenacting that misery of being on the cold step outside. And their school days and the cat's cradle, playing together, rediscovering their younger self, and becoming very energized, like kids, because the reminiscence process generated energy and competence. Extraordinary. You suddenly find somebody at 75 who can skip 100 skips. But only at that moment. If you ask them to do it 10 minutes later, they'd say they never ever could. It's to do with that impetus. Oh yeah, we used to do etc. Learning to count. A lot of them were dyslexic. A lot of them pretended they'd left their glasses behind because people weren't. Well, they had very little education. They left at 14, and this was one of the reasons that I wanted to make the books. That life was so different, and that people needed to know that, really. They also acted out their own moments of sadness, their bereavements, their pain, their losses. And they dared to do this. At first, they said, well, we don't want to do sad memories because it'll make the old people we're playing for very sad. But then people came up to them afterwards and said, oh, I loved the bit, you were so brave to talk about your divorce and how difficult it was. That made me think of mine. So they were getting corroboration that they could take risks and they could play out not just jolly stuff, but serious matters. Is there someone trying to come in there? So, okay, this is just such a nice story. This woman remembered that she hated school and didn't want to go, and her big brother would pretend to have a motorbike and go, boom, 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 come on, Hilda, jump on the back. And she said, so I'd hold on to his jumper, and we'd go to school. So it's very sweet. And Kitty was a great tap dancer. Song and dance was all recaptured in the moment and then rehearsed properly for the show. And there's a classic audience. This was the last Jubilee, not the last one, it was the Golden Jubilee. It was the 50 years of the coronation. But they didn't act out the coronation, they acted out what was happening to them on the day of the coronation. Hilarious stories about husbands completely drunk in the pub and flirting with the barmaid while the wife sat there pregnant and miserable. And just funny stories of what was happening. And not only funny stories, it was a wonderful story of a woman who went shopping and came out of the shop and went home and thought something was missing. Left the pram outside. And so, yes, so it wasn't about the Queen, but it was about them on the coronation day. And there they are, relaxing and looking like a proper theatre company. And it was transformational, the role of theatre in their lives. Two of them had always rather fancied it, being on the stage and wanted to do that. But most of them had no such thoughts. But this woman turned out to be a marvellous actress. She's one of the few of them who's still alive. She was funny, she was quick, she was witty. It was wonderful. I think the impact it had on their lives was enormous. I mean, their grandchildren loved coming to see them perform. They had a very strong sense of time, and, existing in a certain time. There was a community of memory for that time, and they could participate in relocating it, refinding it, revisiting it. And they were not considering themselves victims of history, but participants in history. And their sense of themselves and themselves as a group was deeply significant in their last years. And I had to go to a lot of their funerals and speak or listen, but everybody was agreed how very important it was for these older people. I also liked working with people who couldn't act, which might sound a bit paradoxical, but I didn't want us to go into a care home and have the audience all say, oh, they're wonderful. I didn't think that was the desired result. So if you had somebody who couldn't act for nuts, it was great because the people would say, I think I could do that. And they did, and so the whole idea grew, really. This is the missing video, Remember, there's a big reward after this. The birds and the bees, how they found out about the facts of life, a play in a week. So we got more and more adventurous in how you could make theatre from babies. This is delivering a baby in the bush, from the Caribbean lady who told everybody what to do to deliver the baby. But I love the fact that it's the white woman delivering the black baby. And they really did get very close to each other during that show. It didn't last, actually. They needed the activity to keep them cohering. But they loved it. That was birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it. Let's do it, let's fall in love. And so we extended this then to other ethnic minority elders groups. And this is my colleague from New York, Peggy Pettit, who came over to help. And we worked with these elders from Nigeria and made a play about their lives. And again, what was so interesting was that the older people came more and more in their national clothes, in their beautiful clothes. And they became much more proud of who they were and of their heritage, and wanted to display it. I mean, it wasn't an easy show to make, but it was good, and the idea behind it was it takes a village to raise a child. That was the theme. And it was based on their memories, really, of their grandparents and the villages they went to stay with them. It's a fun process, it's enjoyable. We got quite ambitious, and in this instance they were preparing a play for a festival of older people's theatre. These Chinese people who came over from Vietnam in the 70s didn't speak English at all, but they did have a warden who spoke English and Chinese, so they performed in their language, but we had a translation. And this is the tea ceremony, and it was beautiful to watch, and they sang, and felt part of the event, because there were many different groups presenting, and they learned a little bit about each other's ways of life. Here the African people went into the local classrooms in Woolwich, which had a very big percentage of Nigerian and other African children, and they gained a lot. They played out the stories of school days from the older people. And they learned their songs, they really did. They learned a whole repertoire of songs in African languages. And some of them actually had names that they didn't understand. They'd been given African names, but they didn't know what they meant. And the grandparents told them what they meant. So they weren't their grandparents, but they were the age of grandparents. And of course, a lot of those children have not got grandparents in the area because they themselves had migrated, often leaving the grandparents behind, mostly leaving the grandparents behind. Very briefly, I want to show you some work which has become some of the most important work with reminiscence, which is looking at the situation facing families who are caring for somebody with dementia at home, and we all know that it's rife, it's probably heading our way. It's not all terrible news. People can communicate well, given the right support and the right input. Very often drama has a place. We've discovered that by reenacting stories from people's lives, perhaps you might get 10 families together, and each family consisting of somebody with dementia and the carer, that they can replay a memory, supported by the other people in the group who get given parts, and all the memories come flooding back. People remember what they wore, what tie they wore, who came, what they gave them. If it was a wartime memory, they probably gave them a broken cup or something. But they remember all that. And there are people in the audience today, including my wonderful colleague Sue Heiser and Caroline Baker, who, if this interests you, you must talk to them, because we've been working together for 23 years on this project. And it's an international project, and tomorrow, if any of you are coming tomorrow, the people from all over Europe are coming to present what they've done with this project and how it's been affected by COVID, and including colleagues from the Far East who've picked up on this work now. And it's hugely important and interesting, because what it does is it includes families who are becoming isolated and withdrawn, and it creates a safe place for them to explore their lives, to take chances, to risk. We've got people here, I can see an ex-trainee, Jenny, and I think we've got, if you're a graduate of this course, can you just indicate? Yes, we've got 4 people here who've trained in, it's an apprenticeship scheme, which we've developed over the years. So it's often about reaffirming the central relationship between the person with dementia and their family carer, often a husband and wife, often at a time when their relationship is under under terrible strain. There are a couple of books about this. How am I doing? Have I got time to show a bit of a film?
It's 10:36, so probably.
I can't remember when I'm supposed to stop.
I think 11:10.
Oh well. Would you like to see a bit of
Yeah.
live footage? Yes. This book, highly recommended. Tells you everything you need to know about Reminiscence Theatre. I haven't said very much about the international work, but it's not just the Dementia Project that's international. There's a network across Europe of people who are developing Reminiscence Theatre as well. And that's been particularly powerful in Germany. It's been really difficult for the Germans to do reminiscence, as you can well imagine. And it's a topic in care homes that's often avoided like the plague. But I took the professional theatre company to Germany, and it was extraordinary because we'd have not Q&As, but sharing time at the end of the performances. And a lot of the elderly German people stood up and spoke their memories in that very particular context, having just seen the British play. They were astonished that there was a song to go with every scene. That is not what we find in Germany, because so much of the music was tainted in the war years, as you can imagine, by the use that was made of it and the nationalism associated with it and all the rest of it. I won't go into details, but for me it was particularly important because I was married, I am married, to a German man, Alex Schweitzer, who's very sadly died. But it was something that we did together very much, looking at German people's memories and how could we make it safe for them to share those memories. So I've worked with 2 or 3 professional German or semi-professional German companies on how to begin to perform their memories. There is also a book we've written about the Dementia Project and the use of drama and art and music with reminiscence for people in care homes and day centres and community centres. And that project is still running. It's going to be running in 3 or 4 places across London. And there are people here who are connected with, some people here have done this work already with other groups, I think. Yes, so you'll find out when you're talking to people. So let's just quickly go to the website. And I think while we're doing that, yes, I thought maybe if I was to show you a little bit of the show we made about the local area, about so you'd see. Yes. The productions, if we click on the productions, and then behind each of these, it's so clever, the website, so clever. Behind all of these is all the stuff, you know, the script. You could click on any one of these, and you'd see the script, you'd see the actors, there'd be an introduction, there'd be all the old photographs they gave us, there'd be a wonderful exhibition, a prize for anybody recognizing anybody in this photograph. No, not that one. Go back a bit. Just, yes, okay, anybody recognize anybody? Radicals.
Can't see it. Can't see it. Keep moving in the house. Can it blow up?
No, can't do, I don't think so. Oh, another one.
Okay. Look at that.
Yes?
High def.
You guessed, Harry.
No, I'm saying high definition.
Yes, high definition. Okay. It's Jack Jones, the Labour leader.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And he came and launched the exhibition. This was in the Reminiscence Centre. Every show we did a 3-dimensional exhibition in the centre. And it was absolutely amazing. It had little bags and there was a little stream in the middle. And there were bottles with memories in. and it was great. So Jack Jones was a very big noise at the time. He was the man who led the pensioners' movement, which was a huge movement in the 1980s. And look, all the hoisting up of the it's quite ambitious and very evocative, and you could put headphones on and hear it. So now we'll go to the production of Just Like the Country. Memory Lane. Go down a bit. There we go, Memory Lane. And we can see that there's quite a lot. There's a gallery of old photographs. There's those camels again. Photographs of the bombing. There's an introduction. Go on to, oh yes, we decided early on that because the tour was so unusual, there were hardly any theatres in it, and it travelled abroad and it went to all these very specific venues that we would include in the archive all the venues we've been to, because it was such a sort of strange and unusual theatre platform. Here you see there will be photographs. Here's the photograph you've already seen. So let's go now to production. And the little triangle indicates that we can see a performance. So let's have a look. It's got a bit of fluff at the beginning, but
let's wonder where the birds are singing, and yonder where the ivy's clinging, sweetheart, down memory lane. Let's wonder now the moon is rising, where everybody's harmonizing, sweetheart, down memory lane, memory lane, where love is just like a song. We'll drift along. Without a care, we'll sing a sweet refrain together. And when we're getting old and gray, we'll wander in the sea, waving a sweetheart down memory lane.
We've just been taking a trip down memory lane, Olive and me, seeing how much we remember about where we grew up.
We lived in the same street, see?
Now, this is going back a while. I was born in 1915.
And I'm a bit younger than Doris, born in 1990.
Of course, it was different in those days. There were no cars, for a start. So it was safe for all the children to play out in the street.
At one point, there were 49 children just in our little town.
Yeah, you'd have these great big families living in these tiny houses, loads of children, so we'd all be playing outside. We were like a little tribe. And if anyone came along who wasn't from our street, we'd know.
And if a new family moved in next door, you soon got to know their business.
Yeah, they soon got to know your business because everyone knew everyone.
It was quite a little community. You didn't want to go out the street, it was so special.
Yeah, and half of us were related, like the Bigingtons.
I'm Bernard Binghamton. I lived at number 6 with my mum and dad. Next door, at number 5, was my grandmother and my grandfather. Next door, on the other side, number 7, was my aunt and uncle. 3 terraced houses, all family as it were.
It was a sun trap, our street, always warm. And the babies were out in their crowds. Yeah, the mums had put them under the shade of the trees. And my mother used to say that along the end of the road where the orchard was, well, that was all watercress beds when she was young.
The houses were first built for the people that worked for the railway. The station's just the other side of the fence.
They had the old horse acne cabs down by the side of the station. Bowler hats the cabbies used to wear then.
And opposite Olive's house is the shed where they kept all the horses. And all you could hear in the evening was the horses banging and crashing the roofs because of the rats that was in there.
Huge, big rats they were, more like cats. And they used to run down the street at night.
Now, they were only tiny, these houses, but they were often divided into 2 with a gas boat on the landing for the upstairs family, and you'd all have to share the outside toilet.
There was no bathroom or bloody hot water.
No garden, just a yard out the back. Come on, hurry up.
You wait your turn!
Of course, you had the front room and the parlour, but, well, we'll only use that on special occasions.
When my mother first moved into the street, she just had the bottom rooms. Well, it was quite some time before she was able to have the whole house.
And it wasn't unusual if one lot of people moved out. See ya. For the house to be sealed, even the letterbox sealed, and sulphur candles burnt inside to purify the walls and get rid of all the bugs.
No one was well off, but then again, no one went without. What one did for one, one did for the other.
Everyone looked after everyone. It's very close-knit streets.
When all is
Just like a song, we'll drift along without a refrain together.
And when we're getting old and gray,
we'll wander in the same old way, dear
sweetheart, down memory lane, down memory
I love the fact that you can actually see the grey hairs in the audience, and they were right up close. And one thing I didn't say is that, let's just get rid of that. The cross. Yes. That it was a style of acting that was definitely out front, because it wasn't fourth wall acting where you pretended the audience weren't there. It was a conversation with the audience. And because it was transcribed, quite a lot of the sentences would begin with things like, oh, I'll never forget thee, or I'll always remember when, and then something would come up, a memory would come up, and the dialogue was with other actors, but it was also with the audience, and this was for very practical reasons, that by the time you got into any kind of care home or sheltered house, you probably had a lot of hearing loss, almost certainly. So I'm experiencing it myself, and it's very uncomfortable. But it does mean that people have a bit more of a chance if you play out to them. And so when the actors would talk to the audience and present the story, it's as though they're in conversation. And that's very inclusive, and at the end of the show, the actors would then sometimes get changed, but I encourage them to stay in costume. And they'd come back for another half hour or 3/4 to say, I saw you looking a bit tearful at that point. Did that remember you? What were you laughing at there? And so people would exchange with the actors, and a lot of actors were great. Most actors were brilliant about that. I think they thought it was a kind of very special opportunity to engage with an audience and to make a difference to them. Yes. So I think at that point, and there's lots more I could show you, but you can look at the website on your own. And there's a lot of interesting stuff around ethnic minority material. I've put a film on the back, which is the Indian show. You can listen on the headphones. It's in English and Punjabi, but it's fairly clear, and that went all over Europe. The exhibitions we put up just so you could see different kinds of reminiscences. The memory boxes, I will just say two things about those. I put them up thanks to kind of together we did it. We've kept them. This was a project from 2005. I wonder if you could have some light on. I don't need this anymore. It was a wonderful project. It was called Making Memories Matter. There were 7 international partners in different countries, and in each country we contacted the army of that country and asked them to give us grenade boxes that had been used to carry bombs. and in most cases were now redundant. So the armies of all 7 countries donated these horrible grenade boxes. Some over there are from Germany and Poland. They're all a different style, but they're still very sturdy boxes. And we hired artists to work, so there were individual artists work for an individual older person in their country and created a memory box. And 60 of them toured across 7 countries in Europe in 2005. And believe it or not, they travelled around Europe for 10 years because people were fascinated by this idea that you could put your life in a box. Again, the byproducts, the spin-offs were amazing. In Finland, it led to the setting up of an older people's theatre company. In Kassel, in Germany, it led to a youth theatre starting, making plays from the stories in the boxes. And here, the university students, and I've even got a video of it somewhere if anyone wants to look over the lunchtime or something, where the students made some really beautiful pieces of theatre. We referred to them yesterday as well. And we put them up for you to see, to think about the many, many and varied activities that reminiscence and the arts together can give rise to. So I'm going to stop there and ask, I might need a bit of help from Harry, so we'll sit here and then field any questions you may have or anything you'd like to see a bit more of from here.
Okay. Who has a question? Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thank you for that presentation, it was wonderful. I just have a question really about structure and how, just watching that, I was just wondering how much emphasis is placed on a kind of narrative arc when you're recording, on a narrative arc when you're kind of presenting these memories, or do they mainly take a kind of more of a kind of montage of different memories, or does it just depend on what you...
No, absolutely not a montage of memories. There's a theme, there's a story, there's a storyline with characters and drama.
Yes, yeah.
It's a play like any other play. But there will be many stories in it which have come from different sources. Mm-hmm. Some of the older people we interviewed right at the beginning were a bit upset about that because they thought it was going to be all their story. Right. I said, well, I didn't tell that bit. And I had to break it to them gently. And I remember when we, I'm Jewish myself, so I can tell you this, that when we went to Jewish homes, it was quite difficult because there was often someone on the front row who'd turn around and say, "This is all my story, by the way." But yeah, no, it was, we needed the detail, we needed the little bits, but part of the skill, part of the task was to find a container for these stories, which had light and shade, allowed for light and shade, allowed for development through time. We often took a chronology or an event, like I showed you a little bit of the Jubilee, you know, whatever it might be. It had to be something that could contain and shape the stories into an emotional and aesthetically satisfying form. And using many triggers, I mean, using actors, using scenery, using music, using props, using audio sound effects as we got more skilled technically. But I think for me, looking again at that little bit of footage, it does remind me that the audience were, you know, right up there with the actors and engaged in the show. Yeah.
It's not so much a question, it's an observation, because I remember doing my very early days as an actor, professional actor in the early 80s. I did something at the Crucible Theatre that was the Vanguard production, Vanguard Theatre, run by Rex Doyle. I don't know whether he was directing it. And we toured exactly those venues, the old people's homes, the sort of community centres. And it was it just brought back memories for me to see that audience right close up,
Yes.
right, where you could literally be closer than we are.
So unusual.
And we had to adapt to that. And the show that we did was called Songs and Wars and People. And it was like songs and sketches from different eras, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, to all people that had lived through that. And the funny story was in Sheffield, in the area that we toured it, there's an area called Brightside in Sheffield. And we were doing it in a small corner of a dais, and we sat there with trolleys with cups of tea and so dinner, as the carers brought them cups of tea. And there was one old lady singing away right in front of us here, and there was 4 of us on stage, and we sang "Don't Look on the Bright Side of Life."
Don't look on the bright side.
Yes, you've got to look on
Yes.
the bright side. Yeah. And we say you've got to look on the bright side, and then this woman just stood up right in front of us. Hey, there's nothing wrong with bright side. I've lived there all my life. Don't use taking the piss out of bright side. I've lived there, and we had to sort of wake up. I said, well, come and sing. We had to adapt as actors because you used to get that reaction, which was wonderful, and the very funny moments, but they were involved.
Well, if there were some really scary moments, I remember one chap playing an out-of-work docker, and this woman on the front row said, "Isn't he gorgeous?" "Come and sit by me, darling." And then we did performances in mental hospitals. I mean, God knows I didn't go to those on the whole because I found it so upsetting. But I do remember being at one, and this woman, she clearly had dementia, and she had a sort of stuffed cat on her wheelchair that she obviously kept with her all the time, and all the way through the show she was going meow, meow, meow. We had terrible gigglers in the absolutely slaughtered gigglers in the cast, and we had to sort of regroup and get back together again. But it was certainly very unpredictable.
So we've reached the point now that we can reminisce about reminiscence theatre.
It was there, but I sort of in my late 20s, early 30s.
Yes.
But we did have one observation where we just suddenly chimed up after about 2 minutes into a song, and we heard one woman say petitionally, "Oh, I'm not going to like this."
People were totally uninhibited. The audience. And one of them, I remember somebody about the music. Somebody, we were gathering memories, and somebody started singing a song. Then she noticed that the person sitting next to her had tears pouring down her cheeks, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't want to upset you." And the old lady said, "It's lovely." Go on. And it was somehow letting people cry if they wanted to was quite revolutionary in those days. Really was. Yes.
I noticed that many of the actors were female. I'm just wondering whether there was any differences between the genders as to how they received or interacted, or...
It depended a bit on the content. I mean, the dockers, the one about the river, there was 3 men and 1 woman. And the shows looking at migration, whether with Indian people or Caribbean or whatever, tended to be half and half men, half women. But some of them were very specifically about women's roles, such as What Did You Do in the Warm-Up, which was about women's work, had no men in it. Mostly it was there were more women than men. Reason being, I wanted to give the women a voice, but also the women lived longer. I mean, loads of the men were dead at this point when we were recording them,
What about the impact, though, on the audience? I'm saying, was the interaction the same across both? Or?
Well, it's hard to say, really. I mean, I never forget doing the Dockers show, because we did it in venues where Dockers met. And I naively thought that we could close the bar for the show. And no such luck. I mean, that was very extraordinary, that it worked, but it worked because the Dockers, well, I mean, I saw one man knock back 4 pints in an hour. And it was just how it was, and you had to. It was difficult sometimes, you know, when we were recording the interviews. That was done in pubs because that's where people were. And I had two colleagues, two men, Andy Andrews and Charles Wagner. They're up in Lancaster and London. Anyway, they were marvellous actors, but they went into pubs and recorded people. And they were quite clear at the beginning of the interviews, but you can imagine what they were like by then. You could hemming and blinding, and it was really hard to make sense of what they were saying. So different audiences were. It was quite subtle, the differences.
But did you get sort of emotional responses from men in the audience, or were they a bit more closed off?
I think they were, yes. I think they probably were. I couldn't lay a finger on an example. But it wasn't. I mean, the very first show we did 50 years ago, I remember, because I've seen it in the photograph, him coming up to me at the end of the show with tears absolutely streaming down his face and saying that was my life. That was my life. And so I wouldn't like to differentiate really in that way.
Lady at the back.
Hello. Hi, Pam. Well, it's lovely to be here, by the way, everyone, in person, doing something like this. I actually feel quite nervous asking a question. Pam, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the intergenerational reminiscence theatre work that you've done. I'm just about to start a project with some year 7 and 8 pupils who will be the actors. And I just wondered if you could maybe talk about the challenges of that, or what I should have my eyes open to, etc.
Well, don't take them to Salzburg, is my first piece of advice. It was a huge success working children and old people performing together. But we got a bit over-ambitious, and we were invited to go around Germany and Austria, France and Belgium to go on tour. A couple of parents came with who unfortunately didn't actually share a view of parenting. They had all the contrasting views of how this should be done. And the old people wanted to go to bed around 7 o'clock and get up at 7 in the morning, whereas the kids wanted to go to bed about midnight, drunk, and singing from the hotel roof. And I'll never forget the sight of Olive, aged about 85, without her teeth in, with her hair flying, saying, "Get those fucking kids off the roof!" And it was a nightmare. So don't travel. Don't travel. But it was great, and the kids. My son was in it, and all his friends, and they loved doing the shows, and they loved going into the past, really, and they'd interview people, and then they'd play out the stories and scenes, and the old people would either be in the scene, or would help them by giving ideas about what could be said or done. Quite a lot of the activity was out of school time in the youth theatre. And the ages were sort of 8 to 20. There were quite a wide range of ages playing different characters. My favourite, I think, was Grandmother's Footsteps, in which the old people played the grandparents and the children played the old people as children. And it was a lovely show, and there was a book published to go with it. And I think all the shows were very warming. It was interesting because some of the children didn't have grandchildren. Some of them didn't have grandparents, and they became very physically close to. There was a lot of sitting on knees and hugs and tears and things. They became like surrogate grandparents. I mean, I don't think it would be smiled on today, to be honest. But it was. There was close bonding. I think the kids, we weren't Puritan. We didn't say things like, "You can't say okay," because it wasn't invented then. We just let them explore the stories, I think. The other big slice of intergenerational work was theatre in education, which was the thing I'd been most excited about before I got into reminiscence. And that was whole classes of kids coming to the Reminiscence Centre for a day to live the life of a school child in the 1930s, or to live the life of a hop picker. The poor families in London went to the hop fields of Kent and earned a bit of money for winter clothes and had a bit of a holiday for the kids. So yes, it was a very fruitful thing to work across generations, and we can talk about it at length.
I'm just going to check the time.
It's 2:05.
Well, it's actually 7 minutes past. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. We've got 3 minutes, but there was a question.
There's a couple of questions now. I think.
Oh, sorry, there are. Okay, we'll try and fit them both in, shall we?
Yeah, let's.
Is that okay?
Difficult.
I just wanted to ask about the Reminiscence Centre. It seems a shame it isn't there anymore. And why isn't it there? And because it seems nice to have a physical presence somewhere where people can go, because not everyone has access to websites.
How long have you got?
It is there, but under new management, I think will be a very quick answer to
Well,
this.
it is there, but what was a museum of everyday life, full of, perhaps you went there, it was absolutely full of objects that you could handle and touch and so on. They've now made it into a library. It is a community hub. It's a library. There are adult education classes there, and I think some of the staff who are there are still making exhibitions and things in other places. But it's really like a sort of community centre now. It was very specialised, and people came from all over the world to train in reminiscence. It was a big thing. I'm glad it's still there, but it's not the same thing, and the theatre work isn't happening in that way. I think they are still doing couple of plays with young people. I just don't know, but I do agree with you, Susan, that it was a unique thing, and I'm very sad that it isn't doing what it used to do in terms of bringing people from all over the country and all over the world to participate in festivals of reminiscence theatre. Does that answer? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We have the last question.
So mine was.
Go on. Sorry. Yes.
It was just if you could say a bit more about the funding model, with who was kind of on the payroll in the kind of, particularly in the early period when you were doing the interviews, and then did the actors come in at that point? Were they doing the interviews that were then structured and devised, or passed on to a writer, or was it kind of a different process that then the actors just came in and embodied, and when did the designer come into the process, etc., etc.?
Yes, no, it varied enormously. There was a permanent administrator and stage and company manager and director, artistic director, and then a writer. The writer would come on beforehand and do a lot of the interviewing, but there were other shows, like My First Job and 50 years ago, a lot of the early shows, the actors stayed on the payroll and went on and did the next show and the next show. And they were super bunch of actors, but then we wanted to look at ethnic minority elder experience. So you couldn't use the same actors. So we then took on actors for particular shows representing particular minorities, including the Irish show. And then all the controversy about whether when we did the Jewish show we should use Jewish actors. And, we got into all the debates that people who make theatre can find themselves in the middle of, shall we say. There was somebody over there who wanted to ask a question.
Okay, well we have.
I
think it would be good to start the day on schedule.
So
if there are questions, hopefully there'll be opportunities to ask them later on. But thanks very much, everyone. So we're going to have a 10-minute break, but we're going to say thank you very much for coming.